Why did the radio crackle with a voice no one recognized, calm, steady, while trained operators were already preparing to die? No one asked that question at first. They were too busy bleeding, too busy counting seconds, too busy realizing that the ridge they thought was empty was very much alive. Pull back 3 meters, now. The voice didn't shout, it didn't plead, it didn't sound heroic. It sounded certain. Lieutenant Commander Miller wanted to scream back. He wanted to demand a call sign, rank, proof of existence. Instead, he froze behind shattered concrete, breath ragged, ears ringing, while the courtyard disintegrated around him. And somewhere behind him, through a broken kitchen window, Alina Vance exhaled and squeezed the trigger. 14 hours earlier, no one had looked twice at her. The knife rose and fell in perfect rhythm. Chop, slide, not rushed, not careless, precise. Alina didn't need to look at what she was cutting. Her eyes stayed on the stainless steel reflection, watching distorted silhouettes move behind her. Years of training hadn't vanished. They'd only been buried beneath grease, heat, and routine. The kitchen at Fob Keystone smelled like powdered eggs and dust. It always did. Afghanistan got into everything: skin, food, memory. "Vance, heads up," Sergeant Halloway muttered just as the doors kicked open. 6 men walked in like they owned the place. Dust-caked, armed, different, not regular infantry. "SEALs." Alina finished the onion before turning. Uniform cubes. Muscle memory never lies. "Chow hall's closed," she said calmly. "Hot rations at 1800, MREs by the door." The man in front, breaker patch, mirrored sunglasses, looked past her like she was equipment. "We've been moving for 6 hours," he said. "You're gonna cook us something real." The word sweetheart landed harder than any insult. "I'm Specialist Vance," she replied, "and the stove is cold." The chuckles that followed weren't friendly. They were dismissive, predatory. Miller stepped closer, voice low. "We do the things that let you sleep at night." She met his eyes, not angry, not afraid, just tired. "Powdered eggs," she said, "or nothing." He scoffed, grabbed an apple and walked out. "Useless," he'd said. She watched them go, watched how the sniper adjusted his scope without looking, watched how Miller's armor rode too low, watched mistakes. "Assholes," Halloway muttered. "They're sloppy," Alina replied quietly. That night the wind started to rise, and Alina sharpened every knife in the kitchen. Why did no one notice the cook staring too long at the briefing map? The Tactical Operations Center felt like a freezer: cold air, blue light, silent authority. Alina moved through the room refilling coffee, invisible by design. Support personnel learned that skill early. The map glowed on the wall, red circles, blue lines. Her eyes drifted upward. Sector 4. Marked impassable. Her breath caught. It wasn't a cliff, it was a staircase. A false summit, defilade, perfect plunging fire. Her mouth opened and closed again. "Something wrong, Specialist?" Miller asked without turning. Her throat tightened. She saw it, she knew it. She trained for this once: terrain analysis, angles, kill zones. But Miller didn't see a soldier. He saw a cook. "Just checking water levels, sir." He dismissed her without a second thought. "Impassable," he said later, "lazy enemy." Alina walked back to the kitchen carrying shame, heavier than any weapon she'd ever held. The storm erased the sky without warning. One moment dusk, the next brown violence. Wind slammed into the mess hall. Metal screamed. Dust forced its way into lungs and eyes and systems. "Secure the vents," someone yelled. Alina moved automatically. Crank, seal, protect the filters. Then silence. Not quiet. Wrong silence. "Incoming!" She screamed just before the first mortar hit. The blast knocked the power dead. Darkness swallowed the kitchen. The smell of cordite replaced grease. Her body locked. Freeze response. The one that ended her sniper training years ago. Contact front. Miller's voice dragged her back. The SEALs were blind, night vision useless in the dust. Alina crawled to the shattered window facing Sector 4. Lightning split the sky and showed her everything. They weren't climbing. They were already there. The heavy machine gun swung toward the courtyard. "They're on the high ground," she whispered. Then the mess hall door opened, and hell rushed in. Why did the rifle land at her feet? Ghost collapsed hard, blood everywhere. His rifle slid across the tile and stopped inches from her hand. The kitchen filled with gunfire. The enemy was flanking. Miller couldn't see it. Alina's heart hammered. The rifle terrified her, and yet her hand wrapped around it anyway. She let go. Not yet. She treated Ghost instead. Tourniquet, pressure too late. "Pick up the weapon," he whispered. Then he was gone. The service door shook. They were coming. Alina stood. She didn't feel brave. She felt sick. The door burst open. She didn't use the scope. She looked over it. One breath, one squeeze. The man vanished backward. She fired again. Then again. Silence followed. Alina stared at her apron, now streaked with blood and flour, wondering when her life had become this. "Miller," she said into the radio, "kitchen secure." Confusion answered. She moved to the window and became the battlefield. How does a cook calculate wind at 600 meters while men train for this panic? Alina didn't think. She solved equations. Wind left to right, hold 4 mils, wait for reload. The gunner paused. She fired. The ridge went silent. "The cook, sir," she said when Miller demanded to know. "Move now." She dropped RPG teams, cut lanes, controlled chaos. She didn't feel powerful. She felt necessary. When the enemy used a woman as a shield, Alina almost broke. Almost froze again. Instead, she waited. Pattern pause. One shot. The woman ran free. The commander fell. "Good kill," Miller whispered. Alina didn't respond. She checked her ammo. 3 rounds left. That's when fear arrived. Real fear. She conserved, waited, calculated. When the bolt locked empty, she found one loose round in blood and dust. Loaded it by hand. One last chance. The enemy stepped into the window. She fired. Silence returned. Then a flashlight. Blue, blue. Miller stood there, stunned. "You're the cook," he said. "Yes," Alina replied, "and you were wrong." He handed her a magazine. No apology, just respect. They climbed the stove together. Shooter and spotter. Equal. The final shot destroyed the mortar tube at 800 meters. Impossible. But done. When the Apache arrived, Alina finally let go. She slid down to the floor, shaking. "I need to turn the ovens off," she whispered. Miller smiled. The next morning, the kitchen was quiet again. But Alina Vance was no longer invisible. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. Why did her hands hesitate over the coffee pot when she knew the map was wrong? Alina felt it before she understood it, a pressure behind the eyes, the subtle tightening in the chest that always came when instinct collided with fear, the kind of fear that didn't scream, the kind that whispered consequences. The Tactical Operations Center was alive with quiet authority. Screens pulsed, radios murmured. Men leaned forward in their chairs like gamblers watching the turn of a final card. Alina moved between them unnoticed, The tray balanced against her hip, steam rising from fresh coffee she had brewed 10 minutes earlier than scheduled. No one had asked her to. They never did. She learned long ago that anticipation was safer than permission. The map glowed on the wall. Her eyes drifted upward again. Sector 4. She told herself she was imagining it, that exhaustion made patterns where none existed. But exhaustion doesn't invent geometry. Training doesn't fade that easily. The ridge wasn't a wall, it was a ladder. She saw the path clear as day, the false summit, the natural depression, the way a heavy weapon team could set up unseen and own the entire base. She could already feel the recoil in her shoulder, the wind correction, the angle of descent. Her mouth went dry. Something wrong, specialist. Miller's voice cut through her thoughts like a blade. She froze. The coffee pot hovered midair. A drop spilled onto the table unnoticed. Every head turned slightly, not enough to look at her, just enough to register an interruption. Tell him. The word screamed in her skull. Tell him before it's too late. Tell him because this is why you're still here. Tell him because people die when maps lie. But Alina didn't see curiosity in Miller's eyes. She saw irritation. She saw a man already convinced he was right. Her heart beat once, twice. Just checking the water levels, sir, she said. The lie tasted like rust. Miller held her gaze for a second longer than necessary. Then he dismissed her with a flick of his eyes, already turning back to the screen. She walked out of the room feeling smaller with every step. The shame didn't come immediately. It waited, patient. It followed her down the corridor into the kitchen, through the swinging doors that smelled of grease and disinfectant. She set the tray down harder than needed. Her hands shook. "You okay?" Holloway asked. "I should have said something," Alina replied quietly. Holloway frowned. "About what?" She didn't answer, because explaining would mean admitting who she used to be. That night, the wind began to howl like something alive. By the time the storm hit, Alina had already moved through the checklist twice. Vents sealed, doors secured, equipment tied down. Kitchens survived storms better than most places. Thick walls, heavy fixtures, built for heat and punishment. She was at the sink when the world changed. It wasn't the sound, it was the feeling, the way the air pulled inward, the way her bones knew what was coming before her brain caught up. Incoming. The first impact knocked the lights out. The second shattered glass. The third tore a hole in the roof of the mess hall. Darkness swallowed everything. Alina hit the floor hard, curling instinctively, hands over her ears. The freeze response came roaring back like it had been waiting all these years. Her muscles locked, her breath stalled. She wasn't here anymore. She was back on a range in Georgia, targets downrange, instructor shouting, the moment when her finger refused to move. Failure had a sound. It sounded like silence inside your own head. Contact front. Miller's voice cut through the noise, sharp and panicked. That broke it. Alina forced air into her lungs, crawled, grasped it into her palms. Dust burned her throat. The kitchen flickered with emergency lighting, orange and unstable. Outside, gunfire stitched the air apart. She pulled herself up at the shattered window. Lightning split the sky. The ridge appeared like a photograph, burned into her vision. They were already there. Not climbing, waiting. The heavy machine gun swung toward the courtyard like an accusation. Her stomach dropped. "They're on the high ground," she whispered. No one heard her. The seals moved fast, but fast didn't matter when the assumption was wrong. They pushed toward the main doors, into the open, into fire that was already dialed in. The first man went down hard. Breaker. Alina watched him fall, the force spinning him backward like a doll. Blood pooled across linoleum that still smelled faintly of breakfast. They dragged him inside. The kitchen became chaos. Boots shouting. Return fire cracking so close it punched pressure into her chest. Bullets tore through walls not designed to stop them. And then Ghost fell. He hit the floor near her with a sound she would never forget. Wet, final. The rifle slid from his grasp, scraping across tile, stopping at her fingertips. Alina stared at it. The weapon was familiar, too familiar. It felt like seeing an old photograph of herself before everything went wrong. She didn't touch it. Not yet. Ghost was still breathing. Barely. Blood poured from his leg in pulses that matched the frantic beat of Alina's heart. Training kicked in before fear could argue. Tourniquet high and tight, twist until he screamed. Sorry, she whispered, even as she knew sorry didn't matter. His eyes fluttered open. Pick up the weapon, he gasped. I'm a cook, she said automatically, like a spell she'd practiced. He shook his head weakly. You held it right. Then he was gone. The service door rattled. Someone kicked it. Once. Twice. The deadbolt groaned. Alina looked at her hands. They were shaking. Blood slicked her fingers, warm, real. The rifle lay there patient. She picked it up. The weight settled into her shoulder like something remembered. The panic faded just enough to function. The door burst open. She didn't use the scope, not at that distance. She kept both eyes open just like they taught her. The man hesitated. He saw a woman, an apron, a kitchen. That hesitation cost him his life. The suppressed shot sounded wrong in the enclosed space, mechanical, intimate. She fired again to be sure. Then the second man appeared. Then silence. Alina stood there breathing hard, smoke curling from the barrel, ears ringing, mind strangely calm. She had crossed a line. There was no going back. Miller, she said into the radio she pulled from Ghost's vest. Kitchen secure. Static answered. Then confusion. She moved to the serving window, the one that looked out onto the courtyard. The scene outside was a nightmare frozen in flickering light. The seals pinned down behind a planter, the gatehouse alive with muzzle flashes, the ridge still spitting death. They were trapped. Alina rested the rifle on a bag of flour and looked through the optic. The world narrowed. Math replaced fear. Wind, distance, elevation. She found the gunner. He was laughing. She dialed, exhaled, held. The shot flew true. 600 meters later, the laughter ended. The courtyard went quiet in disbelief. Target down, she said calmly. The radio erupted. Who the hell is shooting? She didn't answer. She moved on to the next problem. As the seals repositioned, Alina kept firing. Not wildly, precisely. Every round solved something. An angle, a threat, a future. She didn't feel like a hero. She felt like she was finally doing the job she'd been trained to do. Then she saw the hostage. A woman dragged forward, shaking, used as armor. Alina's breath caught. The old hesitation clawed its way back. This was the moment that had broken her once before. Miller's voice came over the radio, softer now. Your call. Permission to stop. Permission to survive. Alina closed her eyes for a fraction of a second. She saw the kitchen, the onions, the life of quiet invisibility she'd chosen. Then she opened them. The world slowed. She waited for the pattern. Shout, shake, pause. On the pause she fired. The man fell. The woman ran. Alina didn't watch. She checked her ammo. 3 rounds left. The realization hit harder than any explosion. 3 chances. The storm began to ease. Visibility improved. That was worse. Because now the enemy would see her. and she was running out of time. Her hands tightened around the rifle. She whispered to herself, not a prayer, not a promise. Just a fact. Make them count. And somewhere in the chaos, the cook disappeared completely. How do you keep breathing when you realize every shot you fire is the last version of yourself you'll ever be? Alina didn't know when the storm truly stopped. She only knew the air felt different, thinner, clearer, like the world had decided to watch again. Dust settled slowly, revealing shapes that had been hidden. Bodies, broken concrete, twisted metal, men crouched behind cover who were finally visible. Visibility was a gift and a curse. The enemy could see now, and they would adjust. She shifted her position behind the shattered window, careful not to silhouette herself. Her knees ached from the hard tile. Her shoulder burned where the rifle stock had bruised it raw. Pain was grounding. Pain meant she was still present. 3 rounds left. She said it again in her head, as if repetition might turn scarcity into abundance. 3. She scanned the ridge. The machine gun was down, but the ridge was alive. Movement flickered between rocks. A shoulder, a shadow, someone testing angles, someone patient. They were smart now. That scared her more than chaos ever could. Alina, Miller's voice came through the radio, stripped of rank, stripped of certainty. I need eyes, anything. She hesitated at the sound of her name. It felt too personal in the middle of this, like an admission. Multiple fighters repositioning along the ridge, she said. They'll try to flank left, use the depression near the broken wall. How do you know? She didn't answer. She didn't need to anymore. Miller relayed the information without questioning it. Orders shifted. Men moved. And Alina felt something unfamiliar settle into her chest. Trust. It was fragile, new, almost dangerous. She leaned back from the window just as a round cracked through the space her head had occupied a second earlier. Concrete exploded inward. Shrapnel sliced her cheek. She hissed, pressing a hand to her face, feeling blood slick her fingers. They'd found her. Her breathing sped up despite her efforts. The old fear crept in, whispering about freezing, about failing again when it mattered most. Not again. She forced herself to slow down. In through the nose, out through the mouth. The rifle felt heavier now, or maybe she was just tired, the kind of tired that seeps into bone and memory. She peeked again, just enough. A fighter crouched behind a rock, scanning for her muzzle flash. He wasn't reckless, he was methodical. She waited. Too long, her mind screamed. You're waiting too long. But patience had always been her strength, even when it was mistaken for weakness. He leaned out. She fired. The recoil jarred her shoulder, but the shot landed. The man crumpled, sliding down the slope out of sight. 2 rounds left. Her throat tightened. 2 decisions. She glanced down at the courtyard. The SEALs were moving now, coordinated, using the breathing room she'd given them. They looked smaller from up here, vulnerable, human. She realized something then that made her chest ache. They were trusting her with their lives. The weight of that pressed harder than any rucksack she'd ever carried. Alina, Miller said again, we've got movement near the east wall, we can't see it. She shifted her angle, stretching her sore legs, biting back a groan. Her muscles protested every movement now. Adrenaline was wearing thin. She found the east wall through the optic. A pair of fighters low, fast, using debris as cover. They were good, too good. They split. Smart. She tracked the first one, finger hovering over the trigger. Don't rush. She waited for him to clear the obstruction. She fired. The second man froze, shocked by the sudden absence of his partner. He raised his weapon. Alina didn't hesitate this time. She fired again. The echo rang out like a final note. The courtyard went still. Alina stared at the empty chamber. No rounds left. Her hands trembled, not from fear now, but from the release of it. "I'm out," she said quietly into the radio. There was a pause on the other end, a heavy one. "Copy," Miller replied. "Fall back." She almost laughed. Fall back to where? The kitchen was a ruin. Smoke hung thick. The smell of blood and burned food mixed in a way that made her stomach churn. She set the rifle down gently, like it might shatter if she wasn't careful. Her fingers lingered on it longer than necessary. Thank you, she thought, to the weapon, to the version of herself that hadn't frozen. She slid down the wall until she was sitting on the floor, knees drawn up, arms wrapped around herself. That's when the shaking really started. It came in waves, violent and uncontrollable. Her teeth chattered, her vision blurred. She pressed her forehead to her knees, breathing hard. This was the part no one talked about. The aftermath inside the body. Boots pounded toward her. Miller appeared in the doorway, weapon raised, eyes sharp. He took in the scene in a heartbeat. The broken window, the empty rifle, Alina on the floor. He lowered his weapon slowly. "You good?" he asked. She nodded, then shook her head. "I don't know," she admitted. He crouched in front of her, close enough that she could see the dust caked into the lines of his face, the exhaustion behind his eyes. "You saved us," he said. The words landed awkwardly, like something misplaced. She looked up at him. "I should have said something earlier, about the ridge." Miller exhaled, a long, heavy breath. "I should have listened." They sat in that shared silence for a moment, the unspoken weight of what could have been hanging between them. The radio crackled again. Air support inbound, 2 mics. Relief rippled through the base, subtle but real. Alina closed her eyes. She thought it would feel like victory. It didn't. It felt like loss, like something precious had been spent and could never be recovered. When the Apache arrived, their presence was overwhelming. The thump of rotors, the controlled violence they unleashed on the ridge. Alina didn't watch. She focused on the small things instead. The way her hands were still shaking, the sting of the cut on her cheek, the sound of her own breathing. Miller helped her to her feet when it was over. "Medics will want to check you out," he said. "I'm fine." He gave her a look, not skeptical, concerned. "Fine is relative," he replied. As they walked out into the courtyard together, the sun broke through the clouds for the first time since the storm began. It illuminated the damage in harsh, honest light. Alina saw the cost clearly now. She swallowed hard. "I never wanted to be here like this," she said suddenly. Miller glanced at her. "Like what?" "Seen," she replied. He considered that. "Sometimes being seen isn't a choice," he said. She nodded slowly. The SEALs passed her as they regrouped. Some nodded, some stared. No mockery now, no disbelief, just a quiet acknowledgement. It should have felt satisfying. Instead, Alina felt hollow. Because proving yourself is expensive. And the bill always comes due later. As the base settled into an uneasy calm, Alina returned to the kitchen one last time. She turned off what was left of the ovens, straightened a chair, picked up a fallen spoon and set it on the counter. Small acts. Human acts. The radio at her belt crackled again. "Alina," Miller said softly, "when this is over, we're going to need to talk." She looked around the ruined kitchen, at the place that had hidden her and revealed her all at once. "Yeah," she replied, "we are." Outside, the ridge burned quietly in the distance. And Alina Vance stood in the space between who she had been and who she could no longer avoid becoming. Why did the quiet feel heavier than the gunfire ever had? Alina noticed it as soon as the last rotor wash faded into the distance. The absence of noise pressed in on her ears, thick and suffocating. Combat had a rhythm, chaotic, violent, but predictable in its own way. Silence offered no such structure. Silence left room for thoughts. The courtyard smelled like scorched earth and hot metal. Medics moved with practiced urgency, voices low, efficient. Someone groaned nearby. Someone else laughed too loudly, the sound brittle, a release that didn't quite land. Alina sat on an overturned crate while a corpsman cleaned the cut on her cheek. The sting barely registered. Her hands rested in her lap, fingers twitching now and then like they were still searching for a trigger. "You're lucky," the corpsman said. "Couple centimeters lower and we'd be talking stitches." Alina nodded without really hearing him. "Lucky." The word felt strange, heavy, like it belonged to someone else. When he finished, she stood on unsteady legs and made her way back toward the kitchen. Not because anyone told her to, because she didn't know where else to go. The mess hall was unrecognizable, windows blown out, counters scorched, food scattered across the floor like evidence of a life interrupted. Breakfast trays lay overturned, powdered eggs smeared into the dirt by boots and blood. Alina knelt and started cleaning. No one asked her to stop. She gathered broken plates, stacked what could be salvaged, wiped down a counter that would never be clean again. Each motion was deliberate, grounding, a way to remind herself that her hands could still do something gentle, that she was still herself. "Vance." She looked up to see Miller standing in the doorway. He hesitated, as if unsure whether he was intruding. "You don't have to do that," he said. She shrugged. "Someone will." He stepped inside, eyes scanning the damage. "Command asking questions. They want to know how you saw what you saw." Alina's stomach tightened. This was the part she'd been avoiding, the explanations, the labels. "I used to be a sniper," she said quietly. Miller waited, didn't rush her. That alone felt like a gift. "Training didn't go well," she continued. "I froze once, that was enough. They reassigned me. Kitchen needed people." "You didn't tell anyone." She shook her head, didn't think it mattered. Miller leaned against the counter, crossing his arms. "It mattered last night." She met his eyes. "I should have spoken up before." "So should I," he replied. The admission hung between them, equal parts apology and acknowledgement. Outside, a pair of SEALs walked past the broken window. One of them glanced in, then stopped. He hesitated, then raised a hand in a brief nod. "Respect." It unsettled her more than the mockery ever had. As the day wore on, the base shifted into recovery mode. Engineers assessed damage. Intel officers replayed footage. Reports were written that tried to make sense of chaos using neat lines and official language. Alina stayed on the edges. She helped where she could, served what little food remained, listened more than she spoke. People thanked her. She didn't know what to do with that. Every good job felt like a weight added to the growing pressure in her chest, as if expectations were stacking on top of something already fragile. That night, sleep refused to come. She lay on her cot staring at the ceiling, replaying moments she couldn't stop. The hesitation at the map, the look on Ghost's face, the way the rifle had felt in her hands. Her heart raced without warning, sweat soaked her shirt. She sat up, gasping, the room spinning. Ignored. That was the word that surfaced unexpectedly. She'd been ignored for so long that part of her had learned to hide, learned safety and invisibility. Now that she'd been seen, truly seen, there was nowhere to retreat. The next morning, she was summoned to the operations building. The room was smaller than the TOC, more formal, flags on the wall, a recorder blinking red on the table. Two officers sat across from her. One asked questions, the other watched. Alina answered carefully, truthfully. She described angles and win, decisions and doubts. She didn't dramatize, she didn't minimize. When they asked why she hadn't spoken up earlier, her voice faltered for the first time. "I didn't think my voice carried any weight," she said. The watching officer's expression softened, just slightly. Afterward, Miller walked her back outside. "They're going to recommend something," he said. "Commendation, maybe reassignment." Her chest tightened again. "I don't want a medal," she said quickly. Miller studied her. "What do you want?" She didn't answer right away. "I want to choose," she said finally. "Not be pushed, not be overlooked, just choose." He nodded. "Fair." The days that followed were strange, quiet, almost normal. The base resumed its routines, but something fundamental had shifted. People looked at Alina differently now. Some with admiration, some with curiosity, a few with discomfort. She caught whispers sometimes. Cook-turned-sniper, kitchen ghost, the woman in the window. None of them felt like her. One afternoon she found herself back at the map board. Sector 4 still glowed faintly, a scar that wouldn't fade. She traced the ridge with her finger. "You were right," Miller said behind her. She didn't turn. "I know." He stood beside her, not looming this time. Equal height, equal ground. "You could have been killed," he said. "So could you," she replied. He smiled faintly at that. "I'm glad you were there," he said. Alina swallowed. "I'm not sure I'm glad about how," she admitted. He considered that. Sometimes the moment doesn't ask what we want, just what we're capable of. That night, Alina wrote a letter she never sent. To herself. To the version of her that froze on the range, convinced one mistake defined everything that followed. "You weren't weak," she wrote. "You were human." The next day, she folded the letter and burned it over a small flame, watching the words curl and disappear. Letting go hurt. But it also felt like breathing again. As the sun set over the base, Alina stood alone for a moment, listening to the distant sounds of generators and voices. Life continuing. She didn't know what came next. But for the first time in a long while, she believed she deserved to find out. What do you do when the thing that saved you is the same thing you're afraid to become again? Alina felt it the moment the message came down. Not spoken, not written, just carried in the way people suddenly watched her a little longer than necessary. The way conversations stopped when she entered a room. The way doors opened faster now. Visibility has a sound, it's subtle, it hums. She hated it. The kitchen had been patched together enough to function again. New windows, temporary counters. The smell was different now, cleaner, sharper, like disinfectant trying to erase memory. Alina worked the morning shift out of habit, even though no one had assigned her to it. Routine was a language she still understood. She cracked eggs with steady hands, stirred powdered milk into something passable. The motions were automatic, soothing. Until a shadow fell across the counter. Breaker stood there, alive but changed. A brace on his arm, bruises blooming yellow and purple across his jaw. "Didn't think you'd still be in here," he said. She kept stirring. "Didn't think you'd be back on your feet so soon." He nodded once, silence stretched. "They told us," he said finally, "what you did." She waited. He exhaled. "I was wrong about you." She looked up then, not defensive, just tired. "You didn't know me," she replied. "That's different." Breaker studied her for a moment, then gave a short, humorless laugh. "Fair." He left without another word. It should have felt like closure. It didn't. The days blurred together after that. Paperwork, debriefs, quiet congratulations that made her skin itch. Alina learned quickly that hero narratives don't ask permission. They build themselves around you whether you want them to or not. She started taking long walks at night, circling the perimeter fence when sleep wouldn't come. The desert was cooler then, the sky wide and indifferent. Stars burned bright enough to remind her how small everything was. One night, Miller joined her without asking. "You're avoiding people," he said. She didn't deny it. "They're building a version of me I don't recognize." "They always do," he replied. "It's easier than sitting with complexity." She stopped walking, What if they're right to? What if that's who I really am? Miller looked out at the dark horizon. Who you are isn't defined by your most extreme moment. She scoffed softly. Tell that to history. He smiled faintly. History gets things wrong all the time. A week later, the offer came. Formal, clean, impossible to ignore. Reinstatement, fast-tracked with options. Alina read the document 3 times, hands steady, heart anything but. The words blurred into something heavier than ink. You earned this, Miller said when she handed it back. Did I, she asked, or did circumstance decide for me? He didn't answer right away. That night Alina dreamed of the range again. The target downrange blurred. Her finger hovered. Everyone watched. She woke up gasping, the decision still waiting for her in the dark. The next morning, she visited Ghost's locker. It hadn't been cleared yet, his name still taped crookedly to the metal. Alina stood there longer than she meant to, fingers brushing the edge of the door. I don't know what to do, she whispered, feeling foolish even as she said it. There was no answer. Just the hum of generators, life moving on. She closed the locker gently. Later that day, she found herself back at the ridge. Not the actual ridge, what remained of it, but the view from the base that lined up with it, the place where everything had changed. She sat on the ground, knees pulled in, rifle absent, hands empty. I'm scared, she admitted out loud. Scared of freezing again. Scared of never freezing again. Scared of being reduced to a moment that wasn't whole. A voice interrupted her thoughts. You don't look scared. Alina turned to see the woman who'd been dragged forward that night, the one who had run free. She looked different now, wrapped in a borrowed jacket, eyes clearer, still shaken but alive. Doesn't mean I'm not, Alina replied. The woman sat beside her, careful, respectful of space. They told me someone saved me. I wanted to say thank you. Alina swallowed. I didn't save you, I just did what I could. That's usually how it works, the woman said softly. They sat in silence for a while. I saw your hands shaking afterward, the woman added. Mine were too. Alina looked at her, surprised. You don't look like someone who enjoys hurting people, the woman continued. You look like someone who carries it. The words landed gently, truth without accusation. When the woman left, Alina stayed behind, staring at the ground where dust still held faint scars. That evening, she made her decision. Not quickly, not dramatically. She returned the paperwork with notes in the margins, adjustments, conditions, boundaries. She wasn't rejecting who she was. She was redefining it. When Miller read it, he raised an eyebrow. You're asking for oversight. I'm asking for accountability, she corrected, including my own. He nodded slowly. That takes more courage than pulling a trigger. The weeks that followed were quieter. Training resumed, but differently this time. Alina wasn't proving anything. She was relearning on her terms. Some days were good. Some days she stepped back into the kitchen just to breathe. No one laughed anymore. No one rushed her either. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low, Alina stood alone at the window that had once framed the battlefield. The glass was new now, clear, unbroken. Her reflection stared back at her, older, steadier, still unsure. She placed a hand on the glass. I'm still here, she whispered. Not as a cook. Not as a sniper. As a person who survived both. The desert stretched out beyond the base, endless and indifferent. And for the first time since that night, Alina felt something close to peace, not because the past no longer hurt, but because it no longer owned her. She turned away from the window. Tomorrow would come. And for once, she was ready to meet it. What does redemption look like when no one is watching anymore? It didn't arrive with ceremony. No speeches. No applause. Just a quiet morning where the desert light crept in through the kitchen windows and landed on a clean counter. Alina noticed it in the way her breathing felt even, in the way her hands didn't shake when she poured coffee, in the way she no longer flinched at every sharp sound. Healing, she was learning, didn't announce itself. Weeks had passed since the ridge burned. The base had absorbed the violence and kept going, as bases always do. New routines replaced old ones. The damaged buildings were repaired enough to forget how fragile they once were. Alina moved through it all with a steadiness that surprised her. She trained again, carefully, deliberately, under supervision she had asked for herself. Some days she fired, some days she didn't. Progress wasn't measured in hits or scores anymore, but in honesty, in knowing when to step forward and when to step back. The kitchen remained hers too. She kept the early shifts, not because she had to, but because it grounded her, because feeding people felt like a counterweight to the other things she'd done. One morning, Miller joined her at the counter, helmet tucked under his arm. "They approved your terms," he said. She nodded, flipping an omelet with practiced ease. "Good. You're not curious what they said." She met his eyes. "Only if it changes what I'm allowed to refuse." A corner of his mouth lifted. "It doesn't." That mattered more than any rank ever could. Later that day, she stood at the firing line again. Same range, same distance, different weight in her chest. The targets didn't look like judgment anymore, just paper. She breathed. Her finger moved. The shot broke clean. She lowered the rifle and smiled, not because she'd hit, but because she hadn't been afraid to try. That night, Alina dreamed of the kitchen, not the battlefield, of onions and steam and laughter, of a life where she could exist without being defined by either silence or violence. She woke before dawn, peaceful. The memorial was held quietly, as these things often are, a small formation, names read aloud, boots and rifles arranged with care. Alina stood near the back, head bowed. When Ghost's name was spoken, her throat tightened. She hadn't known him long, but she would carry him for the rest of her life. Afterward, she placed a simple note at the base of the display. No name, just 3 words written carefully. "Thank you for trusting me." No one saw her do it. That felt right. As months passed, stories began to fade. New missions took their place. New faces arrived. The legend of the cook in the window softened into something less sharp, less sensational. Alina didn't correct it. She didn't need to. One evening, she stood on the ridge path, not the one that had nearly ended them, but a safer route nearby, used now for training and patrols. The sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the rocks. She remembered how afraid she'd been to speak, how expensive that silence had been. She also remembered the moment she chose to act anyway. Both truths lived inside her now. A young soldier approached hesitantly, helmet held tight against her chest. "Ma'am," the soldier said, "they told me you might help me." Alina waited. "I froze during a drill," the soldier continued, voice trembling. "Once. Everyone keeps acting like that's all I am now." Alina felt something soften in her chest. She nodded slowly. "Freezing isn't failure," she said. "It's information." The soldier blinked. "What do I do with it?" "You listen," Alina replied. "Then you decide who you want to be next." They stood together in the fading light, 2 figures bound by uncertainty and choice. When the soldier left, Alina stayed behind, watching the desert swallow the sun. She thought about how close she'd come to disappearing into the background forever, how easy it would have been to stay unseen. She also thought about the cost of being visible. Both paths carried weight. The difference was agency. That night, Alina returned to the kitchen and locked up after the last shift. She turned off the lights one by one, leaving the room in darkness. At the door, she paused. Once this place had been a hiding spot. Now it was a foundation. She stepped outside and let the door close behind her. The bass hummed softly, life continuing, people sleeping, people dreaming. Elena took a breath and walked forward, not toward applause or recognition, but toward a future she was finally choosing for herself. Sometimes strength isn't loud. Sometimes courage isn't clean. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.